can't even say you're sorry this time, can you? Because what's one more broken promise? Grandfather treated you like crap. You were struggling. I get it. But you can't just... We're here for you.
Have you noticed that everything seems to be about fathers now? But not the wise mentors who always know what to say and how to act. You know, the role models. The fathers we keep seeing in modern media are broken, violent, and absent men. Men who could have, and sometimes even wanted to be better, but still failed. Sometimes men who never really tried at all. They're emotionally unavailable, abrasive, either too strict or too liberal. Sometimes he's not that different from a complete stranger to you. The connection is basically only the blood bond you two have. Sometimes he seems like the most fascinating person you will ever meet, purely because of the entire mystery around him. They pass down their own trauma, they repeat the same cycles of abuse they suffered, they hurt the people they love, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. And the trend of this kind of character has only gotten more and more popular as time went on. In the last decade, some of the most celebrated stories in popular culture have themes about fatherhood or the lack of a father. The modern era of God of War transformed Kratos from a rage-filled killing machine into a father trying to abandon the monster he once was. The Boys is practically obsessed with daddy issues. Homelander, Soldier Boy, Stan Edgar, Dr. Vogelbaum, Billy Butcher, Frenchie, Starlight, Mother's Milk, Lamplighter, almost every single character in this series can be traced back to a father figure and the damage they left behind. Invincible presents a very disturbing and compelling father-son relationship through Nolan and Mark, and we get to see how much the relation and dynamic changes throughout the seasons, and seeing a more sympathetic example of a problematic father. And of course, there are plenty more examples. There's Joe and Ellie in The Last of Us, Logan and Laura in Logan, the entirety of The Bear, also Everything Everywhere All at Once, or like Jarvan the Fourth from League of Legends. You get it, bro. Across genres, platforms, and audiences, stories keep returning to the same question. What happens when the people responsible for shaping us are the ones who hurt us the most? And the reason these stories resonate so deeply isn't because they're new, it's because they're extremely familiar to a large portion of the population. For millions of people, fathers are not symbols, not role models or a person to look up to. They're scars and wounds that haven't even begun healing. And modern storytelling has become very willing to talk about that in the recent years. This is why fathers seem to be everywhere in the modern media, why trauma has become inseparable from these portrayals, and why characters like Kratos, Homelander, Nolan Grayson, and Billy Butcher feel so painfully real. For much of television and film history, fathers occupied a very specific role. They were authority figures, the protector, the provider. They were often flawed, but their flaws were manageable. The narrative almost always reassured us that your father ultimately knew best. But something changed in the last few years. As the new generations came to the world, more people began discussing childhood trauma openly. Therapy became less stigmatized and seen more as a valued necessity for your health instead of the quote unquote sad people doctor. So, conversations about parental neglect became mainstream. The internet gave people a platform to compare and share and relate to each other's experiences. And soon, a realization emerged. A lot of people have difficult relationships with their fathers. Not necessarily monsters or criminal fathers, although there are people who have these issues. Most were simply emotionally unavailable, who were physically present but completely absent at the same time. Men who had no language for affection, men who carried their own wounds and unknowingly passed them on. Modern storytelling and art began reflecting this reality. Instead of asking whether a father was good or bad, stories started asking a more complicated question. What does damage look like when it gets inherited? Before 2018, Kratos was known primarily as a symbol of rage, an ungovernable man with willpower not even the gods can match. He slaughtered all the gods in the Greek pantheon, destroyed an entire civilization, and killed anyone standing in his way. His anger was legendary. Truly, the most iconic part of his character was his rage filled quotes and actions. And, of course, the push away your daughter minigame.
Father!
But the 2018 soft reboot changed everything. Kratos isn't fighting Olympus anymore. He is raising a kid, his son, Atreus. And what makes this relationship fascinating is that Kratos is clearly kinda terrified of Atreus. He's terrified of being present because Kratos understands who he is and the damage that he's capable of inflicting on everyone around him. Kratos knows he is a violent and damaged individual. He knows his entire life is a monument to unchecked rage, ambition, and vengeance. And he fears Atreus becoming exactly like him. And so he keeps his distance until Laufey died and he was forced to more actively step into the father role. Kratos' arc is his new solo fatherhood situation, forcing him to confront himself. For decades, Kratos solved most of his problems through violence, since he was mostly dealing with very physical problems. Being a dad and trying to be the best version of you for your child doesn't allow for that kind of solution most of the times. You cannot simply kill your way through these complex and abstract feelings, thoughts, and questions. And for the first time, Kratos faces an enemy he cannot defeat physically: himself. What makes him compelling is that he represents a specific type of father many people recognize. The father who genuinely loves his child but lacks the tools to express it. He is trying to be better while constantly fighting old instincts. He mistakes distance for strength, and he believes vulnerability is dangerous. Every awkward conversation between Kratos and Atreus feel real because countless people have experienced versions of it. The father wants to connect and guide. The child wants reassurance, security, comfort, neither knowing how to bridge the gap. Kratos is compelling because he's trying, and that effort, however messy, distinguishes him from many other fathers we will discuss, because some fathers don't break the cycle. They become part of it. People often describe The Boys as a satire of superheroes, celebrity culture, and corporate capitalism. And it is, but underneath everything else, The Boys is a story about fathers and their sons. Almost every single major character of this series has some sort of paternal trauma. Let's start with the biggest one.
As a matter of fact.
Terrific. Because I believe that what God wants me to do is laser every fucking one of you.
Those hands down by your sides, Mason.
Calm down.
Homelander is arguably one of the best antagonists in modern television. The terrifying thing about him isn't his powers. I mean, it is too, but it's not all about that. It's his emotional development, or rather, the lack of it. Homelander never had real parents. He was raised in laboratories to be studied, observed, and experimented on. He was created rather than nurtured. His need for constant love and validation is endless because he was carefully engineered by the best psychologists in the world to have those needs ingrained into his very being. Many of the horrifying acts he commits emerges from emotional wounds and past experiences that never healed. This is where we'll talk about our first father figure from The Boys, Dr. Vogelbaum. Vogelbaum isn't Homelander's father biologically, but he occupies the role of a creator and sort of a caretaker, and he fails catastrophically at both roles. He provides supervision without affection, control without love, structure without any humanity in it. Homelander grows up believing he is simultaneously superior to everyone and utterly and completely alone, a complete failure. And the result of this, he becomes a child trapped inside of the body of a powerful man. We've seen this kind of character before. Specifically, if you look at the original Greek mythology, a lot of the gods in the original mythos have personalities similar in concept to Homelander's. Every god is flawed in some way. They feel jealousy, pride, irrational anger. They do petty shit against mortals, like Athena transforming Arachne into a spider because she felt disrespected by Arachne's gloating in a sewing contest she won. And they also do horrible things to mortals, like the whole story of Medusa, really. In any case, Homelander's way of being and personality is very similar to the way I'd imagine OG Greek gods to be. Then comes Stan Edgar. Stan's relationship with Homelander resembles another form of paternal dysfunction, which is that of cold detachment. He understands Homelander, but for manipulating and controlling purposes only, and that genuine care is completely absent. Again and again, Homelander encounters authority figures who keep using him rather than loving him. And eventually, he has a chance to do something different. Which brings us to Ryan. Homelander desperately wants to be a father, but he approaches fatherhood the same way he approaches everything else, as having ownership over something, as a means of healing himself. He doesn't understand that his son isn't his property, and he isn't his miracle that will somehow make his life better and fix him in a way. Ryan is his own person, and that's why the relationship is unsettling and fundamentally doesn't work. Homelander isn't merely raising his child, he's attempting to manufacture the love he never received and that he so desperately wants in Ryan. Giving Ryan everything that he ever wanted as a kid, not realizing that Ryan genuinely does not want any of these things. He hates the attention from fans, he hates being in the spotlight, he hates going to these meetings with these executives and industry idiots. There are multiple moments throughout the series in which Homelander makes Ryan uncomfortable by forcing him to do things he doesn't really want to do, by constantly pushing past his limits and his boundaries. He even ends up physically hurting Ryan too, almost ending his life because his son wasn't as loyal to him as he hoped he would be.
I know. You're a fucking disappointment.
Unresolved trauma rarely produces healthy parenting. It usually just reproduces itself. And here we finally reach Soldier Boy. Perhaps one of the best reveals in the series, in my opinion. For years, Homelander fantasizes about having a real family, and then through a random phone call to his personal number at Vought, he discovers that his childhood idol and role model has been his real father the entire time. It definitely proved his superiority, quote unquote, to him even more. And then, what happens next?
You're a fucking disappointment.
Soldier Boy simply rejects him. Soldier Boy sees weakness in Homelander and his let's be a happy family attitude towards him, because Soldier Boy is reminded of how he was with his own father, how he was treated, and in that moment Soldier Boy is not talking to Homelander, he is reenacting a scene that he played with his own father before. The moment is horrifying because Homelander kind of becomes a child again for a few seconds. All his confidence just evaporates. You can see it in his facial expressions during the moment. He's just a son seeking approval, and seeing that, we understand something more about this dynamic. Homelander didn't emerge from nowhere. The cycle existed before him. The abuse existed before him. Soldier Boy himself was abused by his own father generation after generation. The trauma continues to repeat and travel through the individuals involved, exactly as it often does in reality.
But don't you worry. Daddy's home.
One of the biggest mistakes people make when discussing trauma is assuming being an adult ends it after enough time, like you're just gonna get over it. Often, adulthood simply gives trauma more room to operate, and Billy Butcher embodies this idea perfectly. On the surface, Butcher appears to be an independent, aggressive, and strong man, but emotionally, much of his life remains trapped in childhood. His father was abusive towards him and his younger brother Lenny. The effects of that abuse never disappeared. Instead, they became integrated into Butcher's own personality and honestly, his entire being. His anger, inability to trust, self-destructive tendencies, and obsession with committing violence, all of it carries echoes of the environment that shaped him. The tragedy of Butcher is that he spends years becoming the very thing he hates, literally. He even has basically the exact same powers as Homelander. He treats people the way damaged people often treat others. He pushes them away. He manipulates and uses everyone, hurts them before they can hurt him. And last but not least, he struggles to believe he deserves any kind of love. Trauma often creates that belief that affection is conditional, that vulnerability is dangerous, and that people inevitably will leave you in the end. Butcher isn't simply fighting superheroes, he's fighting lessons taught to him decades ago, lessons he never asked to learn.
What?
You aren't listening, Mark. My time here has been a speck in the span of my life. You don't know me. I will burn this planet down before I spend another minute living among these animals. Please.
Few scenes in modern animation hit as hard as Nolan Grayson revealing his true nature. For most of his life, Mark idolizes his father. Nolan is the type of man that every son might admire and aspire to be like. He's strong, he's confident, he's competent, he's respected, he's the personification of certainty. But then the illusion collapses, and suddenly Mark faces one of the most painful experiences imaginable. Realizing the person who shaped your understanding of the world isn't who you thought they were. Nolan represents a particular kind of paternal trauma, the father whose love feels conditional, the father whose expectations became possible burdens. And throughout Invincible, Nolan repeatedly struggles to reconcile genuine love for his family with his own ideological commitments and cultural lessons that contradict that love. He isn't emotionless or incapable of affection. The problem is that affection constantly loses to something else, be it duty, power, identity, belief. Many people can understand this feeling intimately. Being loved by someone who continually chooses other priorities, a career, an addiction, pride, status, control. The child receives affection, but never enough. It's never consistently, and that uncertainty becomes its own form of damage. Mark's story is fundamentally about reconciling two conflicting truths. My father loves me. My father hurt me. Those truths can coexist. In fact, they often do, and that complexity is why Nolan resonates so deeply, because real relationships rarely fit neatly into categories of hero and villain. The uncomfortable truth is that most viewers are connecting with these characters because of a pattern recognition. Not everyone has experienced abuse. It's also important to point out that yes, there are in fact healthy fathers in this world, but many people have experienced the disappointment, the neglect, the distance, the conditional approval, and unfair expectations. Fathers who loved them but couldn't communicate it. Fathers who tried and failed. Fathers who never even tried. When audiences watch Homelander begging for approval, they aren't relating to the superpowers. They're relating to validation. When audiences watch Kratos struggle to express affection, they're relating to the emotional barriers Kratos feels in that moment. And when audiences watch Mark confront Nolan, they are relating to a shattered perception moment in their life. The moment where everything changes, where your view of the world is challenged. The details differ, but the emotions remain recognizable. And that's why fatherhood has become such a huge storytelling territory in the recent years, because fathers occupy enormous psychological space in many people's lives, whether present or absent, loving or cruel, supportive or neglectful. They help shape our identity, sometimes positively, sometimes horribly. And stories are increasingly interested in examining those consequences.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
This pattern extends far beyond the examples we discussed. Joel from The Last of Us is a father consumed by loss, whose love becomes both salvation and destruction.
Yeah.
Logan from Logan discovers that protecting the next generation requires vulnerability rather than violence. Kendall Roy's entire existence in Succession revolves around earning approval from Logan Roy, a father who weaponizes affection.
Happy Father's Day, Daddy.
What is this supposed to be, a lima bean?
It's a heart.
That's some shoddy craftsmanship, son.
BoJack Horseman repeatedly explores how parental dysfunction echoes throughout adulthood. Again and again, contemporary storytelling asks the same question: what do we inherit from our fathers? And perhaps more importantly, what do we choose not to inherit? Because that's the real conflict at the center of these stories: cycles versus change. So, why is everything about fathers now? Because we're finally talking about them honestly. For decades, culture preferred the most positive archetypes for fathers: the strong ones, the wise ones, the reliable fathers, but reality is messier, and we all know that. Real fathers can be loving in one moment and as harmful as your worst enemy in another, protective and damaging, present and absent at the same time. Modern stories reflect the complexity. Kratos fears becoming the source of his son's pain, and that fear results in his own absence, which makes his son literally sick in the game, only recovering after his father truly opens up to him, at least about who and what he is. Homelander is a clear example of being product of emotional neglect and what happens when someone just doesn't have any kind of real parental figure. He was raised by cold and distant scientists, and after growing up, by manipulative and faked executives. Soldier Boy simply chose to pass his wounds forward, even if he can't really understand completely why he feels this way. He points it out himself. He feels kind of proud about Homelander.
He is a f***ing asexual weirdo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as much as it pains me to say this, he's my f***ing asexual weirdo. Nobody f***s my son but me.
What?
That came out wrong.
Billy Butcher spends adulthood fighting demons created by his own father and painful mistakes he committed with his brother Lenny, all the while having to deal with all the shittiness of his current life. Nolan Grayson forces his son to confront the terrifying gap between love and harm, to conform to ideals and beliefs just so he won't lose his father. Mark dares to challenge his father, to say, "I know that you love me, you won't do this," only to be oh so wrong.
Your mother's having another one of her episodes.
The pattern is simple. They all ask a question. What happens when the people who shape us are themselves broken? The answer, unfortunately, is often a cycle of violence and trauma. But these stories aren't only about trauma, they're also about recognition, the possibility of change, because every one of these stories contains a choice: repeat the cycle or break it. And perhaps that's why audiences keep returning to them. Not because they're stories about fathers, but because they're stories about inheritance, about the things passed down to us without our consent, the wounds, the fears, the angers, the expectations, and the lifelong struggle to decide which parts of that inheritance deserve to survive. The child is not responsible for the wound, but the adult eventually becomes responsible for the healing.